Pretty much everyone knows the story of Tarzan, the man who was once an orphan baby that was raised by gorillas. You may also be familiar with Mowgli from the Jungle Book, a child that was also raised by animals. Have you ever wondered if there were real children that lived without any human interaction in the most formative years of their lives? What happens when a child grows up completely alone? Before we start this video, I just want to thank you guys for subscribing. I noticed that there is an increase, so thank you so much for that. If you are new here, hi, welcome. My name is Jasmine. I do movie reviews, TV commentary, and sometimes I cover the occasional odd story. I figured today is going to be one of those odd stories. I'm recording this as a lazy voiceover today because there's really a lot that I need to show you up on the screen. As far as these stories go, there's a lot of pictures, and also I don't feel like being on camera at the moment. I don't feel like setting up lighting, and just like all my other videos, this video is sponsored by myself. I am an artist that specializes in custom portraits of people and pop culture characters. All of my custom orders come with free gifts, so if you're looking to have a special portrait done for someone, please feel free to visit my website and use the contact page so we can get in touch. Recently, I found myself watching a lot of body cam videos, and most of them featured people who were either mentally not able to give adequate care for their children or flat out willfully didn't care for their kids at all. And then CPS and DHS and the police and all these other first responders have to get involved. In almost all the videos I've seen so far, they've gotten arrested and had their kids taken away. I try to be understanding, but my understanding meter has just about reached its limit. I know people have different circumstances, but for me personally, I feel that there's absolutely no reason for you to not be feeding and bathing your kids regularly. There's no excuse to leave your kids in a lice-infested, roach and rat-infested room. Some of these people keep having kids, like they just keep reproducing and don't bother to take care of the kids they already have. Those videos do make you very angry after a while. After all, the kids are completely innocent, and I hate that that's how they got their start in life. But I commend the people that report these individuals because it's very serious. One of the most popular cases is Genie Wiley, a little girl whose father shut her away in a room around the time she was 20 months old. She was forced to be by herself from the time she was a baby until she reached about 13. So Genie isn't her real name, but that's what they named her in this case. There are some sources that state that her name is actually Susan Wiley. Genie was born on April 18th, 1957 in Los Angeles, California to parents Clark and Irene, which would make her about 67 years old right now. Genie's father, Clark Wiley, grew up in foster homes. Eventually, he went on to join the war and then married Irene, who was 20 years younger than him. Her mother had been going blind for some time because of cataracts, and she had limited contact with her daughter. Her older brother appeared to also suffer abuse at the hands of their father, but he would have to feed Genie, and he wasn't allowed to talk to her, just feed her baby food, milk, and cereal. Clark Wiley is described as being extremely controlling, hating noise, and not wanting children, but they had children anyway. So their first child was actually a girl, and that little girl died after being left in a cold garage. Nice parenting there. Then they had a second child that died from complications of birth. So their third child was the boy, who is John, which would have been Genie's older brother. So 5 years after he was born, Genie was born. Clark Wiley, his mother, was killed by a drunk driver in 1958, which would have been the year after Genie was born. So she was born in 1957, and after that, he basically got extremely angry, paranoid, and began to mistreat his children.
The family that once was, that fell apart. You know, I don't have the hurt that I used to have. And I'm really happy for my sister for getting all the attention she's gotten and all the help, professional help. They weren't very educated people, they weren't outspoken, they didn't mingle with people. It's just, and I have a little resentment for that. The fear of my upbringing not being what I expected it to be. I mean, at that point in time, I didn't know what to expect. Okay, but later in life, you know, I would have expected a lot more from my parents than what they gave me. They didn't give me the tools of knowledge to get out and feel comfortable about accomplishment and setting goals. They didn't teach me about the Bible and its teachings and God. Didn't really know there was a God. I feel like at times that God's failed me. And maybe He has, and maybe He hasn't. You know, I'm alive. I've enjoyed a lot of things. God's given me that. You know, God hasn't really failed me. I might have failed Him since, you know, I've let all this time go by, but it's never too late.
Her father claimed that he closed her off from the world to protect her, but as we dig deeper, we'll find out what Genie endured as well as other children that were forced to raise themselves. Genie was raised in almost complete isolation. As a baby, she was forced to stay in a crib that her father altered to resemble some kind of cage to prevent her from escaping, so he put a mesh cover on this crib. Some sources also state that Clark forced Genie into a straitjacket at night.
During that time, Clark had ordered his son John and wife Irene never to talk to her. In her darkened room, she had led a life of near total isolation. Even close neighbors were completely unaware of her presence.
She didn't ever interact with other children. No one taught her how to read, speak, write, use the bathroom, or really do anything. Genie sat alone in a room all day, every day, never being talked to, severely neglected. The only human interactions she had were when her father sometimes fed her and when he would growl and bark at her like a dog. Years of abuse and isolation no doubt stunted her development. Not only did she sit in a room all day, as she got older, her father tied her to a, quote, potty chair instead of being forced to remain in a playpen cage. So he swapped out one demented thing for another. Anytime she made noise, Genie's father beat her. By doing this, he programmed her to never make noises. Fast forward to November 4th, 1970, where Genie Wiley not only left the house and went into the outside world for the first time, the outside world discovered her and was appalled at her condition. One day, her father went out shopping. At 13 years old, Genie was allowed to leave the house with her mother, who went to a disability office, or so she thought, for her own health. This social worker noticed Genie looked malnourished and her odd way of walking, but also the fact that the girl clawed and spat. She reported it, which then led to an investigation. A documentary of this case was made in 1997, which features a quote from Susan Curtis, who worked with Genie. She's a linguist and a researcher. Susan Curtis said, quote, "The case name is Genie. This is not the person's real name, but when we think about what a genie is a creature that comes out of a bottle or whatever, but emerges into human society past childhood. We assume that it really isn't a creature that had a human childhood," end quote. Susan worked with Genie, helping her to progress with basic skills.
Let's see you jump.
She described Genie as, quote, "inquisitive, recognizing many new words, but only speaking a few words for the first several months. But Genie never could put more than 3 words together."
March. March.
You want to see your father? Father is not living.
After the investigation, Genie's parents were both charged. However, her father took his own life, leaving a note saying, quote, "The world will never understand," end quote. So he did that instead of showing up in court for his atrocious crimes.
Where did you stay when you lived at home? Where did you live? Where did you sleep? You slept in a potty chair?
There is a movie based on the events called Mockingbird Don't Sing, which I actually watched, and that's how I found out about this story. This movie came out in 2001. It's very sad. Some of the people try their best to help the girl, while others just take turns traumatizing her. It's also been said that Clark justified his actions by saying that she was mentally R-word. I'm not saying that word. It's right here. That's the word that they used at the time, because this was the 1970s. After this, a team came together to help with the rehabilitation of Genie, and it was something that proved to be a challenge because it's not every day that you encounter a child that has been deprived of her humanity for the first 13 years of her life. When Genie was taken into their care, she weighed only 59 pounds and was reported to have a bunny walk. This was the walk that the social worker had noticed.
When Curtis first joined the case, Genie had a strange bunny walk and other almost inhuman characteristics. Genie constantly spat. She sniffed and clawed. She barely spoke or made any noises.
She was about the size of an 8-year-old child. Other behaviors they observed were spitting, silence, incontinence, unable to straighten her arms and legs, unable to chew food because she'd been fed like an infant, and only seemed to understand a few words. Quote, after assessing Genie's emotional and cognitive abilities, James Kent described her as, quote, the most profoundly damaged child he'd ever seen. Genie's life is a wasteland. Her silence and inability to use language made it difficult to assess her mental abilities, but on tests she scored at about the level of a 1-year-old. old. And that actually tracks because this actually all started when she was about a year and a half old. However, things seem to look up. Genie did learn to do some tasks, such as using the toilet and dressing herself, but continued to struggle with language.
We seized this wonderful opportunity that she provided us in as loving a way as we could, using it to finally get our chance to address head-on specific hypotheses and notions about human language and the human mind.
The indications are that she was beaten for making noise and consequently had learned basically not to vocalize. And she really didn't vocalize very much at all. When I first met her, she was silent most of the time.
There were constant disagreements of who should care for her because her situation was so unique. No one really knew what her care plan should include.
Jeannie also received daily visits at Children's Hospital from James Kent, her psychologist.
It's not like they could conduct these kinds of deprivation experiments on human children because it's highly unethical. They had this single case to try and figure it out. You can't just force a child to undergo deprivation of food, language, human contact, sunlight, all in the name of science. A man named Eric Lenberg, who was a neuropsychologist, presented the theory of a critical period in which someone acquires language. Very little was known about severe deprivation on a child and whether or not a child could ever learn language if they didn't learn it before puberty.
Let me see. The log? You found a picture of a log. I didn't even know you knew what a log was. Where do you see a log?
He likes circles.
The linguist Noam Chomsky, or Chomsky, theorized all humans are basically pre-programmed with a sense of grammar. And this is where Eric says, well, no, they have to acquire this before puberty, otherwise it's practically lost, and after that you'll only have difficulty grasping language if you do at all.
She was extremely interested in everything around her. She wanted to know the word for everything around her. She wanted to engage people all around her. She was not mentally deficient. Her lights were on, and everyone who worked with her, from teachers to therapists to me, knew that she was not retarded. It was clear as day. And as she began to learn more and more words, hundreds of words, much more rapidly than I ever imagined, and stringing them together, I began to think maybe I will be wrong. Maybe she will be the one that will prove that this hypothesis is incorrect.
Sometimes Jeannie would stay with one of her teachers. One of the teachers was named Jean Butler, who took care of Jeannie during a measles outbreak, but she started to prevent other people from seeing Jeannie. People were starting to become suspicious of her intentions since she claimed that she'd be the next Anne Sullivan. Anne was someone who worked with Helen Keller to communicate. Jean Butler eventually had to give up Jeannie, who then lived with David Wrigler for the next 4 years.
So it wasn't because she was cognitively deficient.
Jeannie often listened to classical music and even began drawing to try and connect to others. Her way of trying to get across to others was very unique.
In other respects, it was because she was cognitively deficient in this island of human mind, the mental faculty that we call grammar.
In 1974, the National Institute of Mental Health, or NIMH, pulled their funding, so Jeannie ended up being forced to live with her birth mother, Irene. This was a terrible idea because, remember, her father and mother were both charged with her abuse. But her father was dead, and the mother didn't ever go to jail for her complicity because the charges were dropped against her. So this ended up happening because Irene and her attorney claimed that Irene was also a victim of Clark. Some people thought it was a good idea to arrange this. They were desperate to place Jeannie with someone and quickly running out of options.
At the time Genie was found, brain science was in its infancy. But today, we have a much clearer picture of what actually happens in cases of extreme neglect like Genie's.
Jeannie still couldn't speak in sentences. She only learned words.
In Genie's brain, the left part of her brain, her cortex, that has those neural systems responsible for speech and language, because she never heard any words and because she was never spoken to very often, they didn't get stimulated. And because they weren't stimulated, they got smaller and less functional and disconnected, and ultimately that part of the brain literally physically changes.
Her brain could not form sentences due to her limited development.
Without normal stimulation, their brains are smaller and malformed, and the earlier this neglect begins and the longer it carries on, the worse the damage will be. Starved of stimulation, Genie's brain had simply not developed the capacity for language, and now that she was a teenager, she would never be able to learn.
With all this, Irene Wiley had the gall to sue the teams that worked to help Jeannie, claiming that they were overworking her.
As Genie's condition deteriorated, Irene decided that Susan Curtis and the other academics had become too close to Genie.
Oh, that is rich coming from her, the mother who pretty much did nothing for her daughter since she was a baby. Irene soon realized that Genie's care was too much for her. Oh, did she? Genie was shuffled around to different foster homes, and this eventually led to a regress in the little language abilities she did have. In these other foster homes, she was subjected to further mistreatment and had become a ward of the state. So it's 1975, which means that Genie's about 18 years old, and the state just doesn't know what to do with her anymore. Remember, her parents' abuse was exposed in 1970, so she had gone through all of this by the time it was 1975.
I went from being asked to be her guardian to 1 week later being prevented from seeing her or phoning her. And ever since then, I've been prevented from having any contact at all.
There's no records of if Genie is still alive. As of 2000, she was in an adult care facility and was described as happy. She is most well known as the feral child. I found this article from ABC News in 2008, which compared Genie's situation to that of Joseph Fritzl from Austria, who was a man that imprisoned his own daughter and forced her to have 7 children by him. It's hard to say that sentence without gagging and filling up with rage. Our second story of a feral child is that of Victor of Aveyron. I do not have a French accent, please do not hurt me. So Victor is the most well-documented case as far as feral children. He was born around the year 1788. He lived in France, and he was actually discovered and captured numerous times. Each time he was captured, he escaped and kept himself far from society. Jean-Marc Gaspard Itard. I don't know how to pronounce his last name. I'll put it up here on the screen. He was a physician at the time. He had given the boy the name Victor, and he worked with Victor for 5 years. No one knows how Victor came to live in the woods near Saint-Cernin-sur-Rance. Again, if I butcher these, I'm so sorry. This was around the year 1794. Many people had seen him and tried to catch him. A widow had even cared for him, and during his stay with her, she noticed that he only ate vegetables. But then he escaped, going back to the woods. During his time living in the woods, he hadn't reached puberty yet. This was in 1800. He would have been around 12. But after he was captured, he did eventually experience puberty. By the year 1800, people thought he was around 12, and he looked pretty rough as far as his physical condition, with scars on his body and lack of language skills. People assumed that he was in the wild alone for most of his life, so his discovery in 1800 by 3 shoemakers once again led to him running away. He didn't talk, and people noticed his odd movements. The philosopher Francois d'Agogne, I don't know how you say his last name. The philosopher Francois said he walks on 4 legs, eats plants, is hairy, deaf, and mute. After this, the boy was sent to one orphanage after another. A psychiatrist reported that Victor was likely mentally ill and had intellectual problems. Another man, whose name was Pierre Joseph Bonneterre, observed that Victor frolicked out in the cold and snow without any clothes, as his body was already used to the weather. Just like Genie, Victor was very limited in his ability to learn, and he didn't make much progress. Jean-Marc had the ultimate goal of civilizing Victor, hoping that he would eventually be able to speak and connect with other people. No one knew where Victor came from. Many thought he was the illegitimate son of a notaire, and being mute may have been the reason that his family abandoned him, which is really sad. It was believed that around the age of 4 or 5, Victor completely lived by himself, almost to age 12. The National Deaf Institute in Paris took Victor in to be studied and in hopes of educating him. Jean-Marc is recognized as the founder of oral education of the deaf, the use of behavior modification with severely impaired children, special education for the mentally and physically handicapped, and the field of otolaryngology. Even though Victor had only known a few words, he did improve in his interactions with other people. And Victor wasn't actually deaf, but people wondered why he wasn't taught sign language by the man that had taken him in. In 1928 in Paris, Victor died of pneumonia at just 40 years old. A professor by the name of Jutta Frith believes that Victor had autism based on his behavior. In the book The Mystery of the Wolf Children, it was reported that Victor's behavior consisted of teeth grinding, rocking back and forth, and spasmodic movements. So in 2008, there was a film called Survival with the Wolves that was adapted from the book, but this story turned out to be a hoax because of the debate of the cases of feral children. It was widely believed that almost all of the cases that were published were fake. At least that's what the French surgeon Serge Arolles thought. The most plausible theory of Victor is that he suffered physical abuse in his home life and was not a genuine feral child. It really isn't possible for a child to survive on their own for years and years like that. Victor's mental impairments likely made him an easy target for abuse, and whoever he was living with could have even treated him like an animal in his younger years. I found found both of these cases to be sad either way. I think the most plausible thing as far as Victor was, yes, maybe he did have autism and maybe the person that took care of him couldn't find him or they lost him on a regular basis. That sounds like the most probable thing that happened. Anyway, thank you so much for taking the time to watch. Be sure to leave a comment letting me know if you've ever heard of any of these cases, or maybe you have another one you want me to cover. Leave it down in the comments. I wanted to do this video for a while as I found it very interesting when I first heard Genie's story. I went down a rabbit hole. I think we should do some more movie reviews as well. I haven't done those in a while either, and I've seen so many good movies since the last one I did. Again, thanks for taking time out of your day to watch. Maybe you will listen to this while you're doing other stuff, but I appreciate you guys subscribing, and I will see you guys in the next one. Bye!
Because there can only be one champion, there can never be two.